His first gig as our cowbell player. But, well, all of you, I'm sure, have heard of Doubting Thomas. You remember after Jesus' resurrection from the dead, although others had seen Christ alive and well with their own eyes, they told Thomas and he was unconvinced. And when Jesus finally did appear to Thomas, do you remember what happened? Jesus said, hey, check it out. The nail scars in my hands and my feet, the wound in my side, see for yourself. Today, I'll bet more than a few of you kind of had that doubting Thomas nature about you. You question things. You're kind of skeptical by nature. You don't believe everything you see online or that you see on television. You want proof of stuff. In fact, one time there was a seeker kind of guy that was coming to the church, and he said, I look around this church and I see people, they have so much faith. Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in. He said, I'd like to believe everything I hear. I wish I didn't have doubts, but I just have a hard time accepting everything on blind faith. Well, you don't have to accept things on blind faith. There is a faith component. But it got me thinking about how a lot of people tend to think that doubt is the opposite of faith, and it isn't. The opposite of faith is unbelief. And there's a big difference between unbelief and doubt. Unbelief is to have come to a conclusion that something is definitely not true. That's unbelief. Doubt is to be uncertain. It's to be ambivalent. It's to be unconvinced or undecided about an issue. In other words, to doubt means you haven't come down squarely on this side or that side. You're not sure. And it may surprise you if I say that you can be a true Christian, a mature Christian, lots of faith in God, the Bible, Jesus Christ, and yet still have some doubts, some uncertainties about particular aspects of our faith. In John chapter 7, John the Baptist was struggling with doubt. Now, he was a prophet. He was a great man of God. And yet he was questioning, was Jesus Christ really the long-awaited Jewish Messiah? So here's a guy who's been traveling Israel for like a year, preaching that Jesus is indeed the Messiah, and now he's having some doubts himself. He's not so sure. So how does Jesus react to John's doubts and skepticism? Does he give him a stern lecturing? Does he condemn him and belittle him? No, if you'll read in Luke chapter 7, it says that Jesus sent word to John the Baptist through some messengers, and the messengers were supposed to convey to John the Baptist that they had seen with their own eyes. Sick had been healed. The blind see, the lame would walk. Tell John the Baptist that. Jesus was trying to bolster his faith. You think, well, didn't that, doubt, kind of change Jesus' impression or his view of John the Baptist? Well, apparently not, because in that very last verse, Jesus said, I tell you, among those born of women, which is just about everybody, among those born of women, there is none greater than John the Baptist. However, I think a lot of people see churches as having an unspoken rule of no doubters not welcome. No questions allowed. And of course, around here, we feel exactly the opposite. We encourage you to ask your questions, explore your doubts, wrestle with different important spiritual issues. And it's okay to be ambivalent or undecided about certain things that you haven't come to a point of resolve on yet. Well, we are in the third week of a series in which we're investigating, is the Christian faith based on fact or fiction? So what do you think? Maybe you've had a certain view your whole life, but if someone asked you to defend that view, you'd have a hard time maybe, explaining. Is Christianity based on legend and myth or mythology? Or is it based on historical fact? And if so, is there enough compelling evidence to tip the scales of probability to where an objective person could be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt? The last week we talked about the overwhelming mountain of evidence that points to the accuracy and credibility of the Bible. And if you weren't here, I would strongly encourage you to go to YouTube. You can just type in The Secret Church of the Bible, something like that. And it'll all come up because it's really important to feel confident in the historical reliability and so forth of Scripture, because everything we believe is based on that, right? Today we're asking, is there really even a God out there somewhere? And if so, what evidence or proof is there to substantiate the existence of God? Now, Gallup polls and other studies tell us that the vast majority of Americans still believe in God. 82% believe there is a God. All right, it used to be a lot higher than that 100, 150 years ago, but now it's 82%. And I'll bet that if you pressed people on it, a lot of people would have a really hard time articulating why they believe there is a God or why they don't believe there's a God. And I wonder how many of you could explain or defend your position as to whether or not there's a God. Now, there are many terms that people sometimes confuse with atheism. For example, there's secularism. However, secularism is not the belief that there is no God, but simply the excluding of spiritual matters and religions in public affairs. That's secularism. Then there's pluralism, which is the viewpoint that all religions, all beliefs are equally valid. We're going to talk about that next week, with all our religions the same. Then there's relativism, that the only absolute truth in life is that there is no absolute truth in life. That's relativism. Then there's existentialism, and that's the belief that people can just determine for themselves what truth and reality are. Everybody's truth and reality is different. That's existentialism. And then there's Gnosticism, the belief that man can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. You just can't know for sure. And then finally, there's atheism, the belief that there definitely is no God. Now, the latest polls and studies reveal that about 5% of Americans are atheists, 6% are agnostic, 29% just say, I have no religion. I don't have any beliefs, I don't have any religious ties. 29% of Americans are in that category now. So altogether, about 40% of Americans fit into the no religion category. 5% atheists, 6% agnostics, and then the rest. Worldwide, about 8% of people around the world are atheists. Now, one of the things that people tend to do, pretty much all of us, is we criticize people who are different from us. Like anytime I see someone wearing a University of Texas shirt, I don't like them. I just immediately don't like them. I know nothing about them other than that they're a Texas fan, but on the basis of that alone, I don't like them. I mean, that makes sense, right? Well, as you know, a lot of people do that with atheism. If you meet someone and find out they're an atheist, it immediately changes or discolors your view of that person. Just as how for some other people, the moment they find out that you're a Christian, it immediately changes and discolors how they see you. And this dynamic is not helpful in how we treat other people. So I want to give you a few simple tips on how you see other people and interact with people who are maybe agnostic or atheists in your life. For instance, number one, avoid stereotyping them. All atheists are not God-hating, anti-Christian, obnoxious, morally depraved people. All right? Many are nice people. They're intelligent, they're kind, they're caring people. Number two, do not say that atheism is their religion or a religion. A religion is usually defined as including a belief in a God or deity, and atheism is a non-belief in a deity. And it just angers and alienates people if they're an atheist, if you insist that atheism is now their religion. Number three, most atheists have really thought through why they have come to the conclusion that there is no God. Now, there are some out there that grew up in church, and church was just forced on them, and God and all this stuff, and they rebelled against it, so I don't want to have anything to do with that. Or because of priests or pastors that get rich, and all these different things. There's lots of good reasons for people to go, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And some atheists fall into that category. And so if you're going to discuss any of these things with them, you need to be adequately prepared to explain why you believe there is a God. And number four, arguing rarely does anyone any good. Now, reasoning, if it can be done calmly and respectfully on both sides, that's fine. But, just sarcasm and put downs and so forth do far more harm than good. I found this like anti-atheism cartoon where Christians are attacking and belittling this person, saying, you guys are doing more harm than good. And likewise with this guy. You think any Christians are going to defect to atheism after running into this guy? Probably not. In this book, Richard Dawkins declares that to raise a child in one's faith is tantamount to abuse. Now, such inflammatory statements change nobody's mind. No Christians are going to go, well, I'm not going to then teach my children about God. On the other side, an atheist complained to a Christian that believers have all these special holidays that are fun, Christmas, Easter, and that atheists have no recognized holidays. And the Christian replied, sure, atheists have their own holiday, April 1st, April Fool's Day. I'm going to guess that no atheist has ever converted to Christ because of a joke like that. So there's all this back and forth. Christians have done some really bad things down through the centuries. Yeah, that's true. And Christians have done some wonderful things. And atheists have done some really bad things over the years, and atheists have done some wonderful things. So I think the best thing to do is to try to take the emotion, the sarcasm, the criticism out of it, and view each other, people who have different views than you, as rational human beings who came to their beliefs for a reason. But what I really want to do today is give you an overview, a sampling of the 4 classical arguments that have stood the test of time in building a convincing case for the existence of God. We obviously don't have time to go into any of these arguments into incredible detail. And those of you who have more of a curiosity about this, you can look these up later. You can write down what they are or take a picture of the screen at the end or whatever. Let me start by explaining what's called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The word cosmological comes from 2 Greek words, one which means logic or reason, and the other means the world or the cosmos. Put it to 2 together, and the cosmological simply refers to the reason for the world, the logic or explanation for the world. And it has 3 parts. The first is the principle of sufficient reason. It doesn't take a keen sense of observation to look around and realize that things exist. There is matter. There's the universe. There are trees. There are rocks. There are people. Things exist. And the principle of sufficient reason asks the question, why do these things exist? How did they come into existence? What is a sufficient reason for their existence? Now, suppose for a moment suppose nothing existed. Would nothingness require an explanation? Thinking, are we entering the twilight zone? I don't really get the question there. Think about it. If nothing existed, if there had never been a world, a universe, there was just nothing ever, there wouldn't have been anybody to ask the question, why doesn't anything exist? But the split second something exists, anything exists, there's the need, if you're a scientific kind of person, to ask the question, what's the reason? How did it get here, and what's the reason for it? Now, the second part of the cosmological argument is that if we could carefully observe all the things existing around us in this world, we will conclude that all of it seems to be contingent, which means that it seems to be dependent upon something else for its very existence, and some to continue its existence, like fish cannot live without water, plants can't live without air, animals, humans can't live without food. Nothing we observe around us is utterly independent, self-caused. Everything that did not exist, everything that we see did not exist at one time, probably will not exist forever. In addition, the second law of thermodynamics reminds us that everything in our universe is in a gradual state of entropy, slowly disintegrating, including human beings. You compare your high school picture to your current picture, it's like, yikes. I mean, everything is going downhill, right? So this principle of contingency, you can take that off, Chris, please. So this principle of contingency asserts that everything around us seems to be dependent on forces outside of itself for its existence. It's not self-created, and that leads us to the big question, which is the third part of the cosmological argument. If all that exists is indeed contingent in a gradual state of deterioration, who or what is the explanation for the existence of those objects or beings? Now, this may stretch your brain a little bit here, but to help us understand this, I want to ask you to sort of pull yourself out of the universe for a second. All right, you're stepping back, and you're no longer inside the universe. And what I want you to do is like draw a circle or around it like that. Everything is in now that exists is in that circle, right? Everything, the galaxies, the universe, the planets, people, everything that has ever existed is now in that. So everything that exists in the universe is now located in that circle. And we have concluded that everything that then is in the circle is contingent. It is dependent for other forces for its existence and is slowly deteriorating and heading toward non-existent. The big question is, what caused all of this non-self-creating contingent stuff that's inside that circle to exist in the first place? Well, the answer has to fall in one of two places. The ultimate cause for everything inside there must either be located in that circle itself or outside the circle. Which explanation makes the most sense? If everything inside the circle, as we said, is contingent and dependent and dying, how rational is it to locate the ultimate cause, or the first cause of everything inside that circle, where by definition nothing is self-caused or independent? Doesn't it make sense that the ultimate cause for everything inside that to be outside the circle, right? I think, most rational people would conclude that the explanation for what's inside that must lie where? Outside of it. By definition, whatever is outside that circle then must be non-contingent, independent, and not deteriorating, or otherwise it would be inside the circle. So everything outside that circle must be then non-contingent, utterly independent, self-cause, which would make it unlimited, all-powerful, without beginning or end, and those kind of adjectives come pretty close to describing God. And for hundreds of years, people have studied and dissected and contemplated this cosmological argument for the existence of God, and have concluded that it's a pretty powerful, compelling, intelligent argument pointing to the existence of an eternal, all-powerful, non-contingent being. And if you want to try to poke holes in that sometime this afternoon or this week, feel free to. Now let's move on to the second classical argument for the existence of God, and that's called the teleological argument, which points to the order or design of the world around us. And it asks the questions, what or who is responsible for all of the amazing intricacies and the symmetry and the order and coordination of all that we see in the created realm? A philosopher named William Paley wrote, "There simply can't be a design without there having been a designer." The teleological argument challenges the familiar theory that all that we see around us came into existence through sheer chance. And as you know, or maybe have thought about, for centuries, from the beginning of mankind on this earth, people would look up at the complexities and wonders of the created realms and simply assume that there was a master designer behind it. It's just common sense. It's like, well, somebody did this amazing thing. And that supposition was basically unchallenged until the 18th century, when science began to hypothesize that the origins of this universe were actually scientifically explainable. And of course, you all know the Big Bang Theory. You've heard of that. That holds with a chance collision of floating gases out in space set in motion a random series of events that over billions of years finally brought us to the complex state of what we are today. You've all heard that theory many times. It's taught pretty much in all our educational institutions. And yet no scientist can adequately explain where did those mysterious gases come from in the first place. And many outright blush at the embarrassment with the mathematical probabilities of a chance collision of floating gases wherever they came from and whatever sphere they were in, space or whatever. Them colliding would produce a single structured molecule, much less the world as we know it today. So the teleological argument basically says that the random chance explanation for the complexity and the design and the order of our world that we see today is highly, highly unlikely. Wherever there is a design, wherever there's structure, wherever there's order, reason and logic forces you to think that, well, maybe some intelligent being was behind that order and that design. So here's a little test for you. Go home this afternoon and take the back off your big screen TV. No, I really actually wouldn't do that. But your computer, your cell phone. You've all seen it. That looks like this, right? You've all seen this. You look inside there and you notice hundreds of tiny little circuits and connectors and wires and so forth. So you look at that very carefully and then ask yourself, was this designed and assembled by an intelligent being, or did it come about by random chance by an explosion in a metal factory? Which would it be? You drive to your home, right? And there's houses on either side of you, and as you're getting there, ask yourself, were those homes designed by an intelligent designer, or are they the result of a random tornado in a forest? And then there they all are. And of course, the more complex the design of anything, the more difficult it is to believe that it came about by accident. I mean, things like living organisms, like plants and animals, and especially human beings, are much more complicated than computers or television or homes or cell phones. So if you consider all of this, the evidence points toward there being a designer behind the world's design, and you'll have a new appreciation then of the teleological argument for the existence of God, which says that God alone can account for the marvels and wonders of the universe around us. Sheer chance could not have produced the complexities of life that we see today. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that Charles Darwin, in his book Origin of Species, said, to suppose that the eye, with so many working parts altogether, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. I think it is kind of a long shot to think that by random chance, by some accidental collision in space billions of years ago, where did space come from? Where did that first atom where did those things come from? And it all then led up to the complexities and designs of the meticulous and amazing world we live in. It seems like only an intelligent human being could create the human eye, or the majestic mountain range, or the exact rotation of the earth. And it has been said by countless thinking people that much more faith is required to attribute the wonders of our world to a chance collision of floating gases than to believe that there's a God behind it. It takes more faith to believe the other. Next time you have a little baby around and you hold that baby in your arms, look at it and ask yourself, could something this magnificent, this beautiful, this complex be the result of a cosmic accident in space, billions of years ago? You got to weigh the evidence and to decide which explanation is most probable. All right, so we've touched upon the cosmological argument, the teleological argument. Now I want to shift gears and talk about what's called the moral argument for the existence of God. And this argument asks the questions, how does one account for the fact that human beings worldwide and throughout the centuries all seem to share a moral code? In other words, if human beings evolved from primeval gases, or were a grown-up amoeba, or a recent improvement of the ape, how does one account for that in every culture since life on earth was known, that people value truth-telling over lying? The majority of people, value kindness over violence, loyalty over backstabbing, love over hate, justice over injustice. How do you explain that? You know, there was a time where people from other countries and other continents, they had no idea somebody existed on these other continents, right? They had no idea because there was no kind of travel like that. So there were people existing here, here, and here, and they all seemed to share this moral code. Could gases or explosions in space be capable of creating a moral code of values and then planting that in the hearts of people worldwide? Could such a remarkably consistent code of values in billions of individual lives, could that have happened by chance? Well, the moral argument asserts that the moral code originated from a moral supreme being who stamped that basic sense of right and wrong in the heart and conscience of every person. All right, finally, let me give you one last argument, and this is of a more subjective than the others, but I think a compelling argument nevertheless, and it is the argument from personal experience. Author Ron Nash writes, religious experiences must be taken seriously as evidence of the existence of God, providing that the person making the experiential claim is widely known as a trustworthy or not crazy person. What he's driving at is if hundreds of millions, and literally over the centuries, billions of intelligent, well-adjusted, non-delusionary people all over the world, including presidents, chief justices, farmers, coaches, housewives, psychologists, economists, and so forth, they claim to have a regular relationship with God. They say they feel loved by God. They say they feel forgiveness from God. That having God in their life has had a profound effect on who they are. They say God has at times given them strength and comfort. And again, these are not the sentiments of deranged people like in an insane asylum. This is intelligent, normal, stable, rational human beings. Like most of you, I've had a few heartbreaking setbacks in my life. And I know what many of you have felt, to feel like your world is caving in. But I also know that in those times, I experience, unless I'm just completely self-deceived, I experience personally, firsthand, the love and comfort and strength of God in my life. And if someone had said to me, you're just making that up, I would look them right in the eye and say, this is, again, I guess we're all capable of self-deception, but this is as real as it gets. And Christians all over the world would take a polygraph test to prove the reality of their undeniable personal experiences with God. And so the question is, how can you account for believers around the globe and every culture at every time throughout history are making these kinds of claims? Are billions of people hallucinating or delusionary or self-deceived? Now, I'm certainly not denying that occasionally kind of an evil or deceitful person will manufacture religious experience to deceive others, like a David Koresh or a Jim Jones. Those things happen. But that should not discount the testimony of billions of high integrity people who claim to have had firsthand experiences with God. So the argument from experience says, when you carefully consider the cosmological argument for the existence of God, and then the teleological argument for the existence of God, and then the moral code argument in human beings, and then you tack on the fact that billions of intelligent, non-delusionary people throughout history have said, I have had a personal friendship with this God, you kind of have to tack that on too. But just as every jury has to finally come to a point of decision, someday you will stand accountable for having come to whatever conclusion you do concerning these evidences for the existence of God. And so, just think about it. If somebody came up and asked you, what or who created all of these contingent, non-creating themselves objects in the world? Who or what did that? Who or what designed the complex and systematic wonders of our world? Who or what stamped that moral code on the hearts of people all throughout history, all around the globe? And what about the billions of Christians who claim to have had a personal relationship with God? I think most of us would say, well, the answer seems pretty obvious. To us, at least, there is a God, an eternal, powerful, non-contingent creator God. He is the master designer of all the wonders of the world, including you and I. He's the author of that moral code written on all of our hearts, and he is fully capable of establishing a relationship with those in his creation, and especially human beings. I think the evidence for the existence of God is pretty impressive. I think there certainly is enough evidence to bring us all to the point of believing beyond a reasonable doubt that there is a God. And I want to say part of the reason we're doing this series is for those of you who are already believers. You have no reason to be embarrassed or to shrink back from making it known that you believe in and have a relationship with God, because your faith is built on a strong and rational foundation. And anybody who's not convinced yet, maybe you're here as a seeker, or you're in the right place. This church is a great place to deal with your doubts, to ask your questions, to weigh the evidence carefully and honestly, and then come to a decision. All right, why don't we stand? We'll have our closing prayer. Lord, today we just want to acknowledge in our own hearts, and we've gathered here together as an acknowledgement that we do believe. We have been convinced. Maybe some of us bought in and didn't really understand it much for a while. But over time, we've learned and we've become even more determined and more convinced in our hearts that this is real, even when we have doubts. Even when something doesn't go right, it's like, where was God when I needed him? We just go forward, trusting you, believing you're there, believing your ways are higher than our ways and your thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And we just continue to try to trust you. So, Lord, we thank you for the opportunity I do today to just talk about these things and help us all feel more confident that our faith is based on fact and not fiction. So, Lord, I pray that we would go out of here today a little bit more confident, a little bit more assured that we're not giving our lives to something that doesn't add up, that is unsubstantiated. We're giving our lives to the most important cause and the most important being on planet Earth. And we thank you for the opportunity to talk about it today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. We will see you next time.